Well, hello everybody. Welcome to this 15 Emanate webinar where Gerardo Escamilla is going to present. Gerardo is a chemical engineer from Tecnológico de Monterrey in Mexico. He has more than 3 years of experience in management consulting in Mexico and USA. He's a ME3 candidate and he's currently doing his internship in IRENA. He's going to present the subject, the enablers and the barriers of the energy transition. But before going with the presentation of Gerardo, us two is going to present a little bit of Emanate. What is it about for the people that is joining for the first time that haven't heard about Emanate before? So the shop is yours. The floor is yours. Sorry, the shop. The floor is yours, as to.
Okay. Thank you so much. Yeah. Thank you so much, Cesar, for hosting this webinar. And I would like also thank you, Gerardo, for being available in presenting his project in Emanate. Yeah, I would like just to start with a little bit introductions, probably for you who joined the webinar for the first time, and also yeah for you who are joining usually. So yeah, I mean it's basically an exchange platform that was created in 2018, beginning 2018, and up to now our main activities are performing webinars that allows people with their own expertise presenting their project. So it is basically an exchange platform, whether it is among graduates or also students. We mean to establish a professional connections, usually with people of a similar passion, and we also wish that we could open opportunity for collaboration, whether it is academic project or it is something entrepreneurial, or it is or also the possibility of finding someone who is more expert than you. Then is also the platform where you can find mentors. So for every webinars that are being presented in Emanate, the speakers are usually very open if anyone wants to contact them for more information, or yeah, for sharing this expertise. And at the same time, as engineers and also as people who are caring about energy and environment, we also encourage everyone. We are actually the should be the role model of people who are living environmentally friendly. So we also share experiences and to encourage a sustainable lifestyle uh, among the graduates. So that's yeah the five objective and missions of Emanate. So as I said before, we are usually doing webinars, and in 2018, since 2018, and we cover a lot of various subjects, whether it is technology or policy or even startups. And that's the mean, because we want to be present for people with different passions. And in 2019, we continue as well. And up to now, we have 6 webinars taking place in 2019. And this is going to be our 15 with Gerardo. So yeah, so we are growing, and we hope that we will grow and reach more graduates, and possibly in the future also involved even people who are passionate about energy and environment. And we are present on LinkedIn, we are present on Facebook and on YouTube. So don't hesitate to go to our groups. Wherever you type on Emanate, then you most probably will find us. And more than that, we are also, because we all of us were working with voluntarily basis, so we spare a little bit of our free time to work on this project. So the more the merrier. The more hands that can be working for us or with us, then the better Emanate can be. So yeah, a community is exactly what you make it. So we need you. So if you are interested in contributing as a webinar speakers in the future, or to write articles in our newsletters, we are sending newsletters every month, and also for podcast and website, just feel free to contact us. And yeah, we are easily findable. And yeah, so this webinar is going to be presented by Geraldo and hosted by Cesar, and I will give the floor to you.
Thanks, as to. In this webinar, we are going to have a slightly different agenda. So Gerardo is going to present us his subject for 20 minutes. Then we would have like a round table for 15, 20 minutes with Luis, Cristina, who has participated in previous webinars, and also they are ME3 former students, and Marco as well. Well, he has Marco as well. So, then we're going to have this discussion, read this round table, and then we're going to have free, I mean, people that is joining on YouTube. You could also make questions, and Nipun is going to help us to communicate these questions to me, and then we're going to make it to Gerardo for 10, 15 minutes by the end. Okay? So, Gerardo, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Cesar. Thank you, Arthur, for the presentation. And once again, it's a pleasure to be here and to present to you what's going on in here for the master thesis preparation. So let me share with you my screen. Let me know if everything's visible for you. We will talk about a very interesting topic from the perspective of the world of the energy sector. Everybody's talking about the energy transition. Everybody wants to make the transition happen in their countries and in different businesses. They're all joining the 100% renewable energy club and just trying to get rid of fossil fuels. But one of the things that I saw when we were talking about energy transition in IRENA is that nobody really understands what to measure for the energy transition. When the people say energy transition, they mostly think about the energy mix of a country or of a company. Where is my energy coming from, or where is the energy? How is the energy being consumed in this particular scenario? So I was looking in the literature. I was looking all around the place. I was asking people. I was reading a lot of reports from IRENA, for IEA, from the different forums that are right now available for energy conversations and different podcasts. And turns out that a lot of people talk about different subjects, but if you really think about the transition, you can round it up to very specific kind of like targets or indicators to measure. So the proposal of this thesis is to create a model that predicts the results of the energy transition at a global level and that helps decision makers take an appropriate decision based on facts. So all of this together comes up into this big model that uses machine learning to predict the energy transition results. And today, what I want to do is I want to show you, first of all, the results, which is in this slide. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the methodology of how I got into these results, why do they matter, and how can we use them. And I would love to open the floor afterwards to have some sort of feedback on the interpretation on these results as well. So basically, to speed up the energy transition, we can do it if we identify the influencing factors of the transition. And then when we identify those factors, we need to focus on each country's factors so that we can create policies around these factors or to address the different market considerations to create these factors. The picture that you have in front of you, these are the top 5 most important predictors of the energy transition. And what I did here is I broke it down by world and then by income group. So what you see here are a set of indicators. I will show you later which indicators we have here. And then what this is the relevance of each indicator to predict the number, the actual number of the targets for the energy transition. And I'll give you an idea of what are those targets. So for now, you can see here that you have very different things and you have movement across the different income groups. That means that for each country for belonging to a different income group, different factors are important or more relevant to understand the energy transition. When people talk about let's create policy, let's talk about markets and all of these different tools that we can implement around the world, most of the people want to focus on the regions, or most of the people want to focus on a particular country. But turns out that when you look at all the data together in a global level, you see the biggest difference in the income group. So that's why we're presenting it like this. So in this presentation, we'll see the energy transitions, how can they address climate change. We'll talk about the analytical framework that I'm proposing here. We'll define and simplify the energy transition results, these 5 indicators that I'm saying, and then we'll define the influencers, so all the other targets that come into the model as kind of like the independent variables of the model. Then we'll talk about what we did for data preparation and then the analysis, the multi-output analysis using machine learning with random forests, and the individual output analysis using linear regression and decision trees. I'm going to skip through a lot of stuff because this is very dense, but I just want to talk about the big picture first. If we look at the global mean surface temperature, right now it's 1 degree warmer than pre-industrial times. So this is what we talk about when we see like all these different reports from the IPCC saying that, yeah, global warming is going on. We need to limit it. The Paris Agreement says we need to limit it to 2 degrees, ideally 1.5, but it's not likely to happen. And you can see here on the chart in the top left quarter, let me zoom in here a little bit, where we have the different the global temperature anomaly per year, and we see how it's incrementing. It's growing, growing, growing. The science says that all of this is caused by greenhouse gas emissions, and that needs net zero global anthropogenic emissions would stop global warming in the long term. So that's what we're aiming at. That's the whole purpose of this particular study. So the emissions, right? This is what's causing the global warming, and in causing the global warming, it's causing the climate change and all these different disasters. So where are the emissions coming from? As of 2010, the IPCC says that 75% of the emissions come from the industry sector, buildings, energy, and transport. For me, when I looked at this information and I look at these industries and I'm thinking about the energy transition, I believe that these 75% of emissions are in scope of a global energy transition that can be addressed with policies. It may not be 100% of the 75%, it may not be all of it, but at least most of this can be addressed by energy transitions. The main drivers of this increase is the energy and industry sectors, and most of the 75%, as I said, can be addressed by energy transitions. But an energy transition is very difficult to understand. The way I think about it is that the energy transition is kind of like understanding people. So, what makes people a success in life? Nobody knows. Nobody can tell you what it is. Is it money? Is it freedom? Is it family? Is it love? Nobody knows. But what we know is that there are a few things that make you happier. There are a few things that make you more successful. And the output of life would be to be successful, to be happy, whatever the output is for anyone. The problem is that it's very difficult to understand what that means for everyone, and it's very difficult to understand how people react to different influencers for this particular system. And it all depends. It's different for everybody. Well, the energy transition is kind of like that. We don't really know what it means to be a successful transition. We know that it's probably renewables is going to help, probably energy efficiency, lowering emissions, yeah, for sure. But we don't really know for sure, and we don't know what influences all of these. People say that is the cost of renewables, that is the price of energy, that is the governments, that is the policies. Nobody can tell you for sure which influence, what are the particular influencers of the transition, and by how much. The energy transition is very complex, it's multidimensional, it's non-linear, it's non-deterministic, it's highly uncertain. It's very difficult to come up with just one little model for the energy transition. But we're still going to attempt to do this in a very holistic way. There are a lot of questions to ask for the energy transition. What are the energy transition results? What are the influencers? Can we predict them? How can we predict them, and which ones affect the most? By how much? Can we design policies effectively? Are policies enough drivers for the global energy transition? Are decision makers in control? And can the energy transition be analyzed at a global level? These are kind of like the hypotheses that I started with. And to answer this, there's an analytical framework that I want to tell you about. If you look at all of these different things, the first thing that I wanted to see is how can we define, if this is like a model where something comes in, it gets transformed in the energy transition, and then you have a result. Then that means that you have kind of like X's and Y's, where X are all these different variables that come into the system, and Y is the result. So the first step in the top left side is to define the X and the Y. The X is the influencers. So what we found, if you look at the literature and you talk to the experts, is basically four big groups of influencers that can predict the transition. First, you have governance and policies. That's very basic. What are the policies of a country, and what is the governance rating of a country? Then you have financial influencers, the energy prices, the renewable costs, the public financing, technical and infrastructural things, renewable energy potentials. You know, where do you are in the world? Do you have solar potential, wind potential? What is the infrastructure? How long does it take to get electricity? How long does it take to start up a business? How much does that cost? And then decarbonization, CO2 intensity, for example, is a very important thing. Decommissioning of fossil fuels is another one. Socioeconomics, you have awareness, you have the economy in itself, and research and development. So this is the predicting that we think is maybe affecting the results. On the other side, the results, we group them in four areas: energy usage, energy efficiency, climate change, and socioeconomic fabric. Because socioeconomic fabric is kind of new, it's out of scope for this particular thesis. Here we talk about welfare, we talk about renewable energy jobs as a share of total energy jobs, but we don't have enough data to actually use it in this model. In energy usage, you have access to electricity, renewable energy installed capacity per capita. I'm not gonna say all of them, but it's like 6 indicators that talk about how do we use energy. Energy efficiency, we're proposing 2. Climate change, we're looking at CO2 per capita, and socioeconomics, as I said, is out of scope. Okay, so now we have X and Y. What do we do now? We need to grab this information from somewhere. So what we do is we look at all the different data sets that are online, all the different reports that we can find online, try to put all of it together. And when we did that, we found that there's a lot of gaps. There's a lot of indicators that do not have enough information, or it's missing for a certain type of countries. So that means that we need to do some consolidation of the data and some missing values, kind of like filling in the gaps, no, for the data before we can analyze it. So that's step number 2, preparing the data. Step number 3, this is where machine learning starts. We do something called the multi-output analysis. When you do models and you think that a model has different results, for example, here we're saying there's 9 results for this model. When you analyze one result at a time, you're probably missing out in some interesting dynamics between the results. So a lot of the literature right now going on in machine learning says that it's very important to look at multi-output analysis. So you don't look at what's one answer in one of these indicators, you look at all of them together. So how does one of the influencers change all of the 9 indicators together? So that's what we're going to attempt with random forests. And then we're going to do individual output analysis. Then we're going to go, okay, so that's how all of them move together. Let's look at each one individually. And then finally, country stories. This is not part of the presentation because I haven't developed it. But once we have all of the results, we can focus in one country at a time and create a story to understand the energy transition for this country, which is what most of the analysis out there is doing anyway. This is getting a bit statistical, but basically what this tells you, okay, from the left side, this is the correlation plot between the 9 different proposed energy transition results. We cannot just analyze 9 things at once, it's too many. And besides, most of them can be correlated. So that means that we can look at each one and say, okay, if these are correlated, for example, the first 3 that you see here on the left side, the renewables in the final consumption, the renewables as a share of electricity, and renewables in installed capacity, all of them are correlated very similarly. So that means that we can grab one of those and use that to explain that one side of the transition. So what we did here is that we chose one of the similars. We prefer the ones that have more data available, of course, because there's better information. We leave the ones that have negative correlation, like access to electricity with renewables in total final energy consumption. And we have to have at least one per group of the 4 groups that we identified before. That leaves us with 5 indicators for the energy transition. And this is something that IRENA is presenting as well in their report of, they call it the Remap 2050. So it's kind of like a model to understand the scenarios of the future. And they propose to analyze the transition, taking into consideration different sections, not only the renewables. So here we're going to talk about access to electricity, the renewables installed capacity per capita, the renewables as a share of total final energy consumption. So not only electricity, we're talking about heat and cooling and all the other energy sectors. Energy intensity to talk about energy efficiency, and CO2 per capita, emissions of CO2 per capita to talk about climate change. So then I thought, okay, well, you cannot just go and analyze the globe, like we have all of these different countries, we have different development stages, we have different populations, energy systems. So what's going on here? As an example, if you look at the renewables as a share of consumption, here you have a chart on the top right. This is a frequency chart. So it's going to tell you how many countries have a different, let's say, value of this particular indicator. And the first one is at a global level. You have no distinction. So you just see like there's something going on in here. Not all the countries are in here in the same spot. So then I look at it by regions as the UN proposes, the sub-regions from the UN. And I could see some differences. You can see there, like, there's some spikes here and there. You see some different information here, but it's very messy. So that's option 1. And then option 2, I thought, well, what about income groups? And this is where I found the most interesting thing, because when you have low income and you have high income, you have a very high share of renewables. And as you change your income, you're moving from one to the other. So I thought to myself, well, maybe that's a very good idea to analyze these countries by income group instead of just looking at a global level or just selecting a region. So that's what we propose here, to look at the income groups to analyze all of the results. I'm not going to read all of this, but I told you we have all these different influencers from the 4 different groups. Well, this is how they are broken down into all these different subgroups. And every single thing that you see here is 56 different influencers, where I found all of the information online for these ones, data from the year 2000 to 2017 for as many countries in the world as I could, put it all together and fed it into the model. So this is just the detail for it. For the data preparation, on the left side, you can see that not all the countries in the world will have information. And what I found, to exclude some countries would be the best idea. So we're excluding 44 countries or territories that are mostly small islands or very small territories from different countries. You can see in the map, the red ones are the ones that are not included in this analysis, but everything that is gray is included. So it's basically a very representative analysis of the entire world. Then on the right side, I was talking to my tutor a lot about this because there's a lot of gaps in the data. But it doesn't mean that the data is unusable. It just means that we need to understand what's the better strategy to fill these gaps before we actually analyze it. If we were to analyze this with all the gaps and all this missing information, we're probably going to miss a lot of good insights. But then the other side is that if you fill the information inappropriately, the results are probably going to be biased. So with my tutor and my boss, we decided that this could be a very good idea to develop all the different methods of imputation. This is how it's called in statistics when you fill in the gaps. And it's from A to J, you have different methods to fill in the gaps. And then there are combinations, like, you can use, first of all, this first one, for example, DBJ. So first of all, it's an interpolation for the values that are missing in between. Then you do a fill down of the values that are missing in the last years. And then you do J's, which is the yearly income group median. So if there's no information at all, then you just grab the median values per year for that income group and you put those into the value of the country. All of this filling the gap of the data is done at a country level on the entire duration of the data. So each country has 18 data points from 2000 to 2017. And just imagine like a big table with all these different countries, just repeating one after the other, one after the other, one after the other. And then each column would be one of the 56 influencers that I explained before, and the 5 energy transition results. So in the end, you get like this huge table, no? Like the example on the right side, where you see the country is Mexico, you have the year, you have the values as they come from the data sets, where you have some meeting data. And then after the methods is completed, you have the completed sample here with kind of like estimated numbers. After that, this is an incomplete slide, but this is the most important slide because this gives you the actual results of the random forest. After you put all of this, you put all of this together, you put it into a machine learning model, and then the model will come up with 2 things. It will come out with a variance importance for each metric and a permutation importance. What these are is like, it tells you how important is one of these influencers in predicting the results of the 5 energy transition results. And what we found out is at the global level, the most important indicator is the PM2.5 average concentration, air pollution. Plain and simple. What this means is, it doesn't mean that, oh, if air pollution goes up, then the energy transition is better. If the air pollution goes down, no, it doesn't mean like that. It just means that whenever the air pollution changes in PM2.5, it has the biggest impact in all the 5 together, all the 5 energy transition results. So that's good because it can help you predict the results of the energy transition if you know what's going on in the air pollution of your country, in the PM2.5 air pollution. And this is the most important one, the most relevant. Then you go down and you see like average wind power density is the next one, CO2 intensity, capex per installed capacity of hydropower, because hydropower is one of the biggest renewables that we have right now. And then average PV out. This is the energy that you can get with photovoltaics in a yearly basis. So these are the most important influencers of the energy transition, the predictors of the energy transition as a whole in the 5 indicators at once. Here's a few questions. I'm not going to read them, but this is why we would care about these results. If there's any issues around it, it doesn't explain how much are these things important, but it explains what is important. The other thing that we want to see is like, okay, so I don't think I'm going to go through this, but this is basically for all the people interested in machine learning. This is actually how it's built, how everything works from the data set to the actual prediction. I'm going to jump through that. If you have questions, we can come back to that. And then what we did is like the same thing, the same results that I just showed you. Let's look at it by income group. So the high income countries, the most important predictor of the energy transition is CO2 intensity, followed by greenhouse gas emissions trading policies. And this is an accumulated number of policies. So how many policies are active in each country each year of greenhouse gases emissions. Then you have the renewable freshwater resources. This is a renewable freshwater is the surface water plus the underground water that can be used for all different purposes. And then you see that the PM 2.5 air pollution is number 40 here. So clearly it's not the most important one for the high income countries, even though it was the most important one at a global level. Then you look at the upper middle income countries, CO2 intensity is still number one. Then you have average PV out, it increases in importance. The arrow that you see going up is how many places it came up as more important than at the global level. Then you have renewable fresh water, similar to the high income, and time to electricity becomes more important. Time to electricity is how much time does it take for a country to get electricity in a certain place from the moment where they took the decision to the moment where they actually get electricity. So as you can see, like in these type of countries, infrastructure and implementation is becoming a little bit more important than in the high income countries. Then we jump lower middle income. This is all about governance. And many people I have seen and talked about, they all talk about policies at this stage. You're talking about the Indias, some places in Africa, some places in Latin America, Southeast Asia. But these results are telling us that the most important factors to understand the transition is government effectiveness and regulatory quality. These two indicators are the ones that are telling you if a government is good at what they're doing, if they are fast at implementing things, if they can be reliable, and if the policies have some sort of like a impact, and if you can actually create regulation properly in a country. All of these things are more important than any other type of policy that you can implement in here, more than tax reductions, more than carbon pricing, more than anything else. And it makes sense because when you start telling people, okay, let's start doing policies in your country. I mean, I come from Mexico. I understand that a policy does not mean that that's actually going to happen. It does not mean that because we have a lot of other things that can predict the results better, which is corruption, which is, some other like private sector getting into the government issues. So you never know what's going on in these type of situations. And then you have cost, the capex per installed capacity of biogas. This was not important before, and now it became super important. Also, the median power price, this is the price of electricity in these countries, is also very important. So maybe here there's some sort of like information going towards like feeding tariffs to start with the renewables in these countries. It could be. Then on the other side, let's look at the low income countries. The most important factor, and you can see by far, is the Human Development Index. More than anything else, it's like a kind of like a big scale temperature of how good is your country in terms of everything, economy, health, all these different indicators that go into the HDI from the UN. And then the median power price is coming up a little bit more. So power price is more important. A lot of people go into these countries with their companies and they say, okay, the only thing I need to know is if I'm going to get an ROI for my project. So that's very relevant in the results here. Capex per installed capacity of hydropower, average wind power density. So we're talking about cost, we're talking about HDI, and we're talking about the renewable energy potentials. Finally, this is the multi-output. So you see all of these, the five energy transitions together. But what if we look at them individually? The five results that we see here on the left side, this is the five results of the energy transition: access to electricity, renewable energy installed capacity per capita, renewable energy in total final energy consumption, energy intensity, and CO2 per capita. So what I did here is a chart that shows the trends per country of all these different five indicators. And I wanted to understand whether a country is improving or not, and by how much. And if you hit like your peak at some point and then you came down, or what was the behavior. So with this type of dashboard, you can look at the green dot, where is the best performance in the 18 years. The red dot is the worst performance in the 18 years. The slope of the curve means like how fast is the transition for each one of these results. Then you have a small distance between the dots. That means that it's probably there's something going on very erratic. There's a lot of change going on. There's a lot of movement. If it's a steady line with long distance between the dots, it means that something's going on okay. The system is working properly. You're generating improvements accordingly. Everything seems to be okay. And the most important for me is like if the green dot is before the red dot, that means that you're getting worse at this instead of getting better. So that's essentially an issue. This kind of like is shown in Norway for renewable energy as a share of consumption. Then on the right side, this is where you see all the difference. Like this is the correlation between the energy transition results, these 5 indicators, but divided by income groups. I'm not going to go through the details, but basically you can see that the high income groups, countries, they have the most differences across all the different energy transition results. And one of the things that I found most interesting here was that CO2 per capita increases with energy intensity for high income countries. So that means that as energy intensity, as CO2 per capita is going up, the emissions are going up, but it's also the energy intensity going up. So you're being less efficient, except when the high income countries have high renewables installed capacity per capita. So that's how we have seen if you have a country with high share of renewables, but also high CO2 per capita, high energy intensity. No, wait, so sorry, I got messed up here. The CO2 per capita increases with energy intensity, except when you have the high renewables. So high renewables are kind of like a barrier for CO2 per capita to increase. They are blocking this situation. So I don't know, I found this very interesting. Then I'm not going to go through the detail of here, but this is an example of by how much do these influencers make a change. So I looked at the individual factors. This is only an example for high income countries. On the left side, just looking at access to electricity. So the question is, what is making access to electricity to go up the most out of the 56 influencers? In the answer for high income countries is economic instrument policies. If you have 9 or more policies, then your access to electricity is 1.7% more than the average. If you have regulatory instrument policies, 7 or more, then is the same increase. If you have a GNI per capita of 88,000 per year or more, then it goes up by 1.6%. And so that's the logic, like that we go on through all of these different 5 indicators, and we do the same thing, same exercise for each income group. And basically, these are the results. This is what we have found. We have found at the same time things that make the results go higher and things that make them go low. So these are the barriers for the energy transition in some way. We can discuss the details if you want, but this is basically the entire thing.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Gerardo. Now we're going to start with the discussion, well, the open discussion with the people that is connected in Hangouts. So could you please go back to your slide number 2, please? I think that, I mean, after in your presentation, the framework is it's quite clear. Why and how do you perform this classification by level of incomes, and how do you identify different factors among them or for each of them? I find this quite interesting, and it makes I think it makes sense somehow, even though without having data. So for the people that it's connected in Hangouts, could you listen to me? Marco, Luis, Cristina?
Yes, Cesar, yes.
Yes.
So what do you think about, first of all, about the framework itself, about the classification of I mean, that Gerardo has performed by incomes, and then he started defining different influencing factors for each classification of income.
Yeah, can I start?
Yeah.
Okay, so first of all, thank you, Gerardo, for the very nice presentation. I really like it, and I really enjoy your approach as well. I'm also working with, well, actually, I'm working on right now on my PhD project. So it's about estimating the energy demand of rural households in developing countries. So I'm planning to apply this model as well as in a global scale. So I understand your concern about like how dividing the countries, like how do we have to make this segregation to make it useful or to make it representative. So I really like your approach of dividing or making this segregation in terms of income. I have also tried to do that, but actually in my case, it worked better with dividing it by climate zones. So I was going to ask you this. So for example, when you showed your first graph, your first results regarding the variable importance that you got from the random forest analysis, most of the main factors, most of the main drivers were climate related drivers, I would say. I don't remember the number of the slide that I don't know if you can maybe put it. It's the first one that you showed with the results of, yeah,
Is it
exactly.
this one?
H8,
Yeah, I
yeah.
think so. Yeah.
Yes,
So
I
I
think.
saw that, yeah, the
Yeah, go
main
ahead.
drivers were driven by the climatic conditions of the countries. Globally, I mean.
Yeah, I find it very interesting as well. And this is something I discussed with my boss for a while. We didn't really know if that would be the best idea because when you look at the, okay, let's say that you look at the solar potentials, right? To look at irradiance a lot around the globe. So we have this solar belt where all the countries in the middle of the world they get the most of the irradiance. But if you just look at those countries, then you see all this type of weird things going on in the energy transition results because it doesn't necessarily mean that they will have the biggest share of solar PV, for example, or
Yeah,
it doesn't
yeah,
mean
exactly.
anything at all in terms of the money flowing into these countries to create new renewable energy projects. So that was something that we talked about, and we didn't see if that could be the best idea for us to follow. But it's definitely something to talk about, and I think it would be interesting to see how the results behave with the climate zones.
Yeah, I think it will be interesting to add maybe in the discussion or something, just
Yeah.
to have some insights about this. Because in my research, I found some correlation between the income of the countries and the climatic conditions as well. So that's why I'm
Okay, that's very good.
suggesting it. Yeah. So
Thank
thank
you.
you.
Thank you very much. For sure, I'll give you a couple of emails with some questions about that too.
Thanks, Christina.
Sure.
Luis, would you like to add something regarding this classification and regarding these factors?
Uh, yeah, so not so much on the classification. I guess I actually prepared a couple of questions, but I can put them on the side later. But maybe in terms of at the moment how the model is set up, we're looking at different the indicators for energy transition are, for example, RE share, and then you also have energy intensity. But at the moment, for example, most of the traditional renewable sources that we have, which are like we associate with conventional power generation, for example, which is hydro, biomass, etc., etc. These are the potential. It's mostly maxed out, and most of the things that we're looking forwards in the future are wind and solar, and it's variable. And when you talk about increasing the renewable share, we're looking towards really increasing the variable renewable share. And in that sense, the bigger value now is flexibility, and in some cases it actually um, it has like a cannibalistic behavior with energy efficiency. At some point efficiency is not relevant because it's more important to be able to use the energy when it's available. So now it's flexibility that is more important if you want more variable renewable energy to come in. So when we talk about these results of energy intensity and renewable share, at some point there will be this cannibalistic behavior, depending on, of course, depending on the country, depending on the framework of the country. I'm just wondering how were you thinking of addressing that, or is there a way in the model that it's robust to take that into consideration?
Thank you, Luis. Yeah, I definitely thought about that too. Right now, the idea was let's figure out, okay, let's see, what's the best energy transition result? Well, we want zero emissions of CO2. Okay, Let's minimize that. But if you minimize that, then you're forgetting about all the other things that we also want. So let's include all of them in a global way, no, in a very generic perspective. When you talk about energy efficiency, one of the best cases that I can think of is Iceland. Iceland has a very big share of renewables in their final energy consumption because they have a lot of geothermal. But geothermal is a very inefficient energy source. So they also have a very high energy efficiency. It does not mean that they are bad because of they have a high energy efficiency, but it just means that that's how it is. You know, they have a high energy efficiency, but they are also performing very well in the other, let's say, four indicators. So at one point, we will have to understand how do we actually kind of like give a rating or a performance for each one of these five indicators. Because in the end, what we want is to net zero the CO2 emissions. So if it's inefficient, but it's renewable and it's not creating emissions, I guess that's a rule that we can say, well, we don't really care if it's inefficient. That's my way of thinking about it.
Just maybe to, well, Luis, I don't know if you would like to deep in this in the subject. Is that clear for you, Luis?
Yeah, no, that's pretty clear. I was just thinking if at that stage, so at the moment we're displaying the indicators as it is, not necessarily like trying to summarize it into like a smaller indicator set, which wherein this contrasting behaviors would play out. So yeah, it's all fine. Yeah,
Yep.
Yeah, it would be amazing to do that, but the data that we have, like these are indicators at a global level. So when you find this data online, these are reported by country per year. So going into the sector level, going into the different industries would be amazing, but it's very difficult to do right now because there's no information out there for all the countries in the world. So it's very complex. But yeah, it's a good starting point, I think, and it will be amazing to see how can we get these results, let's say per energy sector or different sectors of the economy. That would be interesting.
Okay, thanks, Luis. Then Marco, could you listen to us? Oh, I guess he listened to us, but he's not. We are not able to listen to him. Okay, well, let me know. If not, you could also write down your questions or your feedback in the Hangout note chat. Sorry, but we are not able to listen. So just before going to another subject, Gerardo, you talk about geothermal, and you said that this was quite inefficient source, and I know that we have in the panel us too that it's working with this source of energy, us too.
Yeah.
You have some two words for this part of
Yeah,
the
I was like,
geothermal. Why is it perceived like that? I didn't know.
well, to be honest, it depends. Like, I actually wanted to ask questions, but probably that's too much detail because it's not about geothermal. But then I can say that geothermal in Europe, most of the time, like in Germany or in France, where there is no volcanic activities, they are inefficient and energy-wise and also cost-wise. But I don't think it's the case for Iceland. So yeah, I don't know if we have the time for. I don't think it's related, but why do you think it's not efficient?
I think it's not efficient because of the actual energy efficiency values that Iceland has. And I mean, I don't know, I was talking to my boss about Iceland in particular because we were talking about why is Iceland, if you see, I don't know if you can see this, it's very small. But if you look at this, these are the high income countries. Um, so Iceland, number one, renewable energy installed capacity per capita. Iceland, number one, renewable energy in total final energy consumption, 77%. But energy intensity is not even in the top 20 here. It's actually the lowest in the entire high income countries. So Iceland has a lot of geothermal that uses low quality vapor. So you can get better energy efficiency in the power sector by using oil, gas, or coal, just by using these fossil fuels. So that's why I think, and what I have heard about and read about Iceland, I believe that geothermal for Iceland is not as efficient compared to other countries in the
Okay.
Well,
high
because your definition of energy efficiency or intensity.
intensity. So this is
Yeah,
the yeah, this is the megajoules in the energy source.
yeah, that I
Divided
can
by Joule.
probably agree to that, because then yeah, because for geothermal you will need a lot of investment, especially, well, it depends what your data, right? If your data are actually taking into account all the recent development, then probably they still have a high um, investment cost compared to what they are producing at the moment. So yeah, but I agree that geothermal is more expensive to develop than other renewable energies.
Yeah,
Okay.
can I also add something to that? Because like most of the energy intense, the way we measure energy efficiency is usually by a proxy, which is energy intensity per GDP. And in
Yeah.
Iceland, areas where cold areas wherein you use a lot of geothermal, for example, it's usually done for space heating. So in Iceland, there's a lot of space heating, and
True.
when people are comfortable with space heating, and it doesn't really show up as a GDP, but it's a very important energy service, and that's the
Mhm.
reason why you see a higher energy consumption without the GDP. But in energy intensity, it looks bad, but actually, it's not really that bad. It's only because the proxy of energy efficiency, which is energy intensity, it,
Okay.
it's not favorable to them. But that's the it's not yeah, basically that's why.
Okay.
Can I also have
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead. Let's.
yeah um, two questions actually? One is, I noticed that in the worldwide results you have PM 2.5 as one of the biggest, but when you disaggregate it by region, none of them seem to show um, it the PM 2.5 being the highest. So I wonder why suddenly in the global scale it became the biggest factor. And then the second question is, I am wondering if you have considered putting Gini coefficient, which is like a proxy for inequality, as an attempt to try to make the model more robust, because as you mentioned, the social framework is not included. Of course, it's really difficult to get data and to get to make it a little bit more mathematical. But have you considered using Gini coefficient? Because, for example, if we see a lot of papers now in the attempt of France to do energy transition by taxing diesel, it resulted to a lot of rise from the Gilets jaunes, and the recurring explanation is the sentiments of inequality.
Mhm.
Um, I don't know if you've considered putting Gini coefficient as another output or input, but that could maybe help increase like the um, the space of
Okay.
you could get something like that.
Okay, very good. Yeah, that's a very good comment. Why PM 2.5? I'm gonna go for that first. I think the reason behind that is because when you look at the global level, it's basically just all the countries in the world. Let's put it all together. Let's run the random forest, and it gives you a result. So it's kind of like looking at all the different countries together. But when you look at the different income groups, it doesn't necessarily mean that the PM 2.5 will be important for each individual group. Because when you have the all the countries together, you may have other things going on. For example, it may be that PM 2.5 is most important in a certain region, for example, like in Europe, or like in Eastern Europe, where you have like in Poland all these different high levels of PM 2.5. It could be centralized by region, but the regions, if you look at high income versus upper middle, you're dividing Europe in the middle right there. So that's one of the thoughts I had. Is like the answer is I don't know, but I think it's because it doesn't necessarily mean that if you look at income groups, that's number one. But when you look at other different things all together at once, it may be number one. So that may be some sort of like why the data is divided like that, and it's showing different results. That's the only thing I can think of. And then the Gini coefficient, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. I'm not so sure right now, but I thought the HDI includes inequality in its indicator, in the way it's constructed. So it would be interesting to see if I can put the Gini coefficient, but as an output. It could be interesting to see that, and then say that that's the socioeconomic part for now. That would be interesting.
Yeah, I also don't know the detail of the how the HDI is calculated, but I'm not sure because like usually when they show it, the Gini coefficient is separate. But okay, yeah, that sounds like an interesting thing. So
Yeah, thank you for that. I'll look into that and I'll try to find some data for that.
Okay. Marco, now are you with us?
Can you hear me now? Hello?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Yeah, sorry about that. I don't know why the computer was not working with the microphone, but the phone is. That's why I'm connected twice.
Okay.
But yeah, I'm happy to be here. And also, Gerardo, I wanted to congratulate you because in this short time you've put something quite interesting and quite useful, not only in terms of understanding what's more effective, but also in terms of using it into, for example, policy making or like other decision making things that could be very useful when you, for example, are working with a specific country or things like that. I see some usage there that I personally would probably find useful, and I'm sure many more can or could find it useful. It's a little bit late, but I think Luis made a comment on the energy efficiency and the energy intensity thing that you mentioned. I want to go back quickly on it before talking about the question that Cesar mentioned on the income and the classification. But I see that you're using energy efficiency as the efficiency of the electricity generation. Is that right? At like the primary level?
No, I think what we're using here, energy intensity, is the total energy source. So it's all the sectors it's all the uses of energy. This comes from the World Bank indicator of energy intensity. And the last time I checked it, like a month ago, it was the energy sources divided by the GDP. Oh, the other way around, sorry. Where is it?
Okay, it's like economical energy efficiency. Okay, I see.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. No, it's because I'm not sure like if this will fit or not, but I think it's an important thing also to consider because, for example, energy efficiency is also important, or to see it at a level of the real like use or like the amount of energy that is wasted in the usage of energy at the application level. So it's not only like in terms of how much GDP it's laying or how much GDP is creating, but also how much energy the country is wasting because of, for example, at the level of equipment, of like having all equipment or like having poor policies in terms of energy efficiency, because that actually will increase the amount of capital required to build capacity in order to provide services that could have been provided with, let's say, with less energy. And it will also require countries to invest in more capacity, whether it's, for example, they're building renewables, but the renewables that they are building will actually just be, let's say, wasted, or not wasted, but like used in just the current demand of things. And they're not even taking into account all the increases of energy demand that could come from, for example, just having like bad policies in terms of what equipments can like be in the country, can be used in the country, or what or how they're using the energy in, for example, the transport sector or so on. So I know this is very specific, but it's interesting because that will also like make some, let's say, impact, will have some impact in the investment on energy capacity and on building new things. That's one idea that I wanted to just comment. And I'm not sure if there's an indicator actually that you could use in order to plug in and like understand that, but that because this will affect your variables in a certain way. The other thing on the classification I think is very useful, and I also like what Christina mentioned on the climate zones, but I think this is very useful to do it in like the low income or the income of the countries, because, well, in the graph that you're showing at the beginning, you can see some trends that can actually help you understand like what's going on by income and not by the other classification. But also when you work with specific countries and the results that you're getting, that some of them are expected, like, for example, what are the important indicators for each country? And if you go to low income countries, you have, for example, the Human Development Index, which is very important. that's very useful because when you work with a country and then you go and you talk about, to them about carbon emissions and climate change, and they're a low income country, that is not of their interest. They know that they have some commitments, but that's not their priority. So if you follow some of these results, it can actually help you like understand what are the needs and what are the types of policies that you can like start developing in the country, that they will certainly have a side a side effect, we could say, or like a consequence in climate change, but you're actually solving a problem that they need more. So I particularly appreciated that. And I had a question on page 8, which is on the average density of wind power. Could you go to that slide? Wait,
Yes.
I don't fully understand. Like, I know this comes from the result of the model, but I don't fully understand how this could be so relevant at a global level in terms of explaining transition. Is it because the countries that have a high density have already like set up their agendas in order to try to transition their energy, or is it why? How can you explain like this result? I wanted to like learn more.
Okay. First of all, thank you for your comments. I'll take all the considerations. I'm writing notes. In here in this chart, you cannot know that for this chart because it only tells you the importance to predict the results. It's kind of like a very statistical thing. But then I had the same question and I said to myself, what can we do to understand it better? That's why we have the individual output analysis. So this starts from here. And if you look at, for example, the different incomes, this is where I was trying to find, okay, where, if you look at the 5 indicators, where the hell is wind power? So you find it, for example, here in high income countries, CO2 per capita. So what this means is that wind power, when wind power is between 138 and 202 watts per square meter, it reduces on average by 7 tons of CO2 per capita the results of the high income groups, of the high income countries. So that tells you that there's a range of wind power where this is generating a lower result of CO2 per capita. Now, why is that? That's a very difficult question to understand. You need to go and do case studies. You need to understand why is that happening. Is it because you actually have implementation of renewables in this particular area of wind power, selected countries, and it just happens to be that they have this particular range? That's another question to ask.
Okay, I see. Yeah, so it could be a proxy, but we don't know exactly of what yet.
Exactly.
Okay. All right. And then I had another question on page 12. No, I already asked that one. Yes. Are you, for example, in the effectiveness of policies and the performance of the energy transition in the countries, are you considering somehow like the investment that it's there for the policies, for building renewable energy, for any other action towards the transition? Is there an indicator? Are you considering some investment like success or investment performance, like because probably you have the amount of money that is inflowing into the countries, but like what is actually happening with this money, or is there any because you could say, yeah, there's a lot of investment, but is this investment actually like generating something or like having a positive output?
Yeah, for that, the output is the results of the transition. So the renewable installed capacity per capita is the share of renewables increasing. That's the overall output. Of course, you can go in the details and actually look, okay, you had money flowing to solar PV. Out of that money, how many megawatts were generated, right? You can look at that particular thing. But this is the problem I think that most of the models have. They look at this one little thing. So you look at how much money was in, and then you look at the megawatts produced. But you're missing out, man. You're missing out in the entire perspective of the energy transition. So that's why this is like, let's step back. Let's take a look at the big picture first, and then understand, first of all, is the money even a factor? And turns out that it's not. It doesn't matter how much money goes in. And it has been, I mean, you can see that in many countries where you see all the money that is committed. It can take years for the money to actually go into the countries. And when it goes into the country, for $100 that go in, it doesn't necessarily mean that $100 will go into the development,
Yeah,
into the
exactly.
actual. So it's not really a factor that affects that much, even though a lot of people think it is. This is the result that we have seen here. There are no assumptions here. This is not a model that starts with an equation. This is a machine learning thing. So it's an algorithm that detects all these different correlations and gives you an output. So I'm not going in here and saying, I think that CapEx is important. Like, I'm not saying that. So I find it interesting to understand that I thought my internship was about financing. I thought it was important, but turns out it's not as important. It is important, but it's not as important than other things, like the governance, for example.
And then I would like to drive the discussion towards the point where, well, there are some questions for in the people in YouTube. We would take 5 minutes more, and then we would go with these questions. I mean, if there is more questions in YouTube, but you mentioned, well, we are discussing about the effectiveness of investment for the energy transition, and well, that's how I interpret it. But you mentioned that for low income countries, governance was the most important factor, right?
Yes, lower
So
middle.
lower medium. So for me, this is like, okay, if investment is not the solution, uh, how all these countries would face or could tackle or the challenge of energy transition, because it depends on governance, on policies, and we know that some of them, I mean, they might need support somehow, uh, and financial might not. It's a way, but it's not the only way. So how do you think that this could be done, or this could be? How do you think that these countries could face this challenge?
I think that's a very good question, and I think this is the first time that, as a global population, we're actually looking at this. Because before we were just thinking, let's give money to the poor, and they'll figure it out. They'll build something, but it's not gonna happen. And I think that these measurements are telling you that government effectiveness is the most important, because there are issues in the government, in the infrastructure of how the government is built. They have civil wars, maybe they have corruption. So those are the things that you need to address. Those are the things that the UN and the World Bank need to look at before they actually start just implementing projects everywhere. Because you're going to lose a lot of the money. It's not going to go to the project. And even if it does, it doesn't mean that it's going to go properly. It doesn't mean that you're going to leave some trained people there to keep track of the things. So the way to go for these type of countries, in my idea, would be to first try to solve the problems that the government have. You need to go there and, I mean, I'm not a public servant, I'm not a policy guy, but I just think that you need to go and fix how the government does things. You need to implement effective processes, and somebody needs to regulate this, probably from outside of the government. You need to have more independent people in there that are not in part of the corruption fabric of all the different things of government.
Yeah,
That's what I
yeah, and because remember that higher risk, higher uncertainty
think.
might represents also higher ROI by the end of the day. So,
Well, yeah,
uh,
that's for sure.
so it's I think that it's quite difficult to tackle the problem or the challenge of the energy transition when you talk about governance. I mean, I think that for me it's, and you talk also about people. You talk about also what we consider as success, what we consider as happiness. And well, there's quite philosophical questions over there regarding this, but well, I just see a challenge over here. I don't know if Christina, if you have anything to add regarding this. Oh, we lose Christina.
Could I wave in
Or
slightly
you,
with the
Marco?
policy aspect, like very quickly?
Yeah.
I completely agree, and it's something that, like, you see, for example, as you're saying, like many organizations have several projects in different countries, and then what happens is that the policies there are implemented, but there's not capacity or not the willingness or the infrastructure, the structure, sorry, is not ready, for example, for enforcing and monitoring the implementation of the policies. So everything is done at the beginning, but then like nothing really happens. So there's not an outcome out of like these new projects. So that's a problem. And from the thought that Gerardo mentioned before, like if there's a way to control it from, there are actions from different organizations, not only UN but in general, in development and in governance and in transparency and all of that, that there's something happening, but up to a certain level. And I wouldn't say the issue, but the challenge is that countries are sovereign. So if their governments are corrupt, or if their governments don't have the willingness, the political willingness or whatever, there's a point that like international organizations or other types of groups cannot really like push harder or like push further into that aspect. Now, something that works, that I've seen that works somehow, is the international groups, for example the OECD, or other types of, let's say, of like partnerships between countries that have certain targets to accomplish. So countries have, or there's a political weight for countries and the political pressure to comply with certain of these things. That's very helpful in that aspect. Now, how it happens in terms of, for example, direct projects in renewable energies or in energy transition in general, is that organizations that do these projects, they work most of the time with countries that are already ready with the political willingness and sometimes even the budget, because many of these budgets come from allocated money that comes from different treatments and from like the Paris Agreement and from GEF, GCF, and so on. So there has to be already the willingness of the country to put a proposal and to use the money for working in a specific topic. So there's a caveat there, because the countries that are already like doing this work, yes, they are advancing and in some cases, or in many cases, effective. But countries that have conflict, political conflict, or that they are not ready into this, they are not really advancing that much. And they do get some projects, but these projects maybe are like loud in terms of like political let's say political action, not action, but like it sounds nice, it rings some bells, but at the end nothing happens because the country is not ready yet to implement these projects. So that's the focus that needs to happen. And like with something like this, with these kinds of studies and like with publications and like what countries are actually ready to implement something, it will be more efficient in order to use the funding, because at the end funding is important. But I agree that in these results, funding doesn't show as important as governance, because if you inject a bunch of funds into a country that is not ready to do a project of this sort, nothing will happen there. So it's not about the amount of money that you're putting in, it's about how you're actually administrating this money and how effective it will be at the end.
That's great.
Okay.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Marco. I would take just the questions for YouTube, and then I come back with, well, not, yeah, just I'm coming back with Christina after the question of YouTube. The question from YouTube is just about, it's Daniel Guerrero. I guess you know him,
Yeah.
Gerardo.
Saludos, Daniel.
Is how do you think a country could adapt their decisions at local level? For example, a country governments of institution based on a model that gives a global vision. So I guess that basically he's saying, okay, how country could serve from this model, from this analysis that you are doing. And the second question is, do you think could be possible to have this indicator maybe with a separation by zones, like geographical areas or grouping of countries with similar economies? Well, this has been already addressed somehow with the question or the comment of Christina and Marco about climate zones. But well, please go ahead, Gerardo.
Thank you. So that's a very good question. Now, we have all the results, we give you the results, everybody is happy, we create a publication, whatever you want. Now, what do we do about it? Who's going to grab this info? Who's going to take it home and take a decision for it? I guess we don't really know. We don't really know what's going to happen. We don't really know how countries might be using this, because we don't really know how countries use anything. Because when you have a publication, people want to say different things in government. First, what I have seen for example, I was in the IRENA Council, and we have all the delegates that are part of IRENA. What I have seen is that countries with the lower level of economy, they come in here and they just say, this is what we plan, this is what we're doing amazing, everything is great, don't come and visit, or come and visit for tourism. Then the countries that are very efficient, the Germanys, the Norway, the Belgium, these are the countries that are actually having discussions. They actually come in here and ask questions. So these are the countries that I think will grab this type of results. They will take a look at them and say, okay, this is where we are in the high income countries. This is what's more relevant, and it makes sense. it's PM 2.5s. Okay, what does that mean? People don't want to die. People are scared of the air. And because of that, we're taking more actions than before. Nobody cares that much about greenhouse gases because you cannot see the results. You cannot see what's going on in climate change, but you can see how people are dying more when you have high levels of pollution. So that's what happened in China, for example, that they started creating policies immediately. They started creating policies in Great Britain immediately since the last in the last century, just
Yeah.
to people don't die. So I think that's what countries need to do. They need to understand this, internalize it, understand where they fit in this analysis, and then try to understand if they can grab some information from the OECD to create better policies to their own particular needs.
Okay, it's clear. And then we're going just for a couple of questions also with Christina, and then just 5 minutes more because with the people from YouTube, if there's any other question, and then we are going to close this webinar.
Great. Yes, thank you. Yeah, actually, one of my questions was the one that you were asked before. So it was basically who is intended to use this model that you're creating? Like, how are the countries going to take this and your results? How are they going to interpret these results? So that was one of my questions. And the other question was more regarding your model. Why did you, I mean, I'm also applying machine learning, so that's why I got curious about this. So why did you choose to work with random forest? And also, what kind of data are you using? Like, are you using historical data or just like the most recent year data? And another question, for random forest or any machine learning algorithm, you need to have a training set and a testing set. So how are you dividing these sets in terms of like the income, for example, the segregation that you showed, or in global terms? That's just, yeah, those are my questions.
Thank you for your questions. I guess maybe it was my mistake to skip this slide because it's very technical. But yeah, I spent about 2.5 months just basically trying to become an expert in machine learning, reading as much as I could about this, and talking to my tutor. My tutor is he's in UPM. His name, I'm Pepe Jose. His name is Pepe Mira McWilliams. Okay, so he's head of statistics in there. He was the one that recommended me random forests because random forests are very good to understand these type of issues. As I said before, the energy transition is not linear. It's very complex. It's very multidimensional, and it can have some issues in multicollinearity. So that means that when you have a correlation between two different variables, they can affect the result of the overall thing. So you can get a bias if you use traditional kind of like models. So he said, use random forests. They're very good because what a random forest does is it builds a decision tree. For everybody that doesn't know, a decision tree is kind of like how can we simplify the information? If you have a bowl of fruit, and this bowl has like watermelons, grapes, and apples and bananas, the decision tree would be like, okay, let's make a decision on all these different factors. The factor is size, color, smell, whatever. So the first one would be color. Let's group everything that is yellow in here and everything that is not yellow in here. So you get the bananas in one side and then everything else on the other side. And then what you're trying to do is create order. So in the end, you have one different bowl with one different type of fruit. So this is what happens here in the random forest. It's trying to create order, but not in trying to segment fruit. It's trying to create order by minimizing the variance of the results, of the energy transition results. So basically, it's trying to come up with a random set of these different data sets, put it all together in decision trees, and minimize the variance of the results of the random forest. And what the results are is, as you said, Christina, is comparing how do you train the model with some certain part of the data. In this particular case, we use 75% of the data to train the model, and then how you test the prediction of the model. Let's say that you have 100 records, you use 75 of those records to train the model. Once you train the model should be very good. It should be able to predict things. So then you use the other 25% to predict the results. The beauty of this is that you already know the results of the 25%. So you use the model to predict the results, and then you compare the prediction of the model versus the actual numbers. And then that gives you calculate something called the root mean squared error, which is the variance of the different results. And if the root mean squared error is very small, that means that you have a very good model to predict something. So that's how a random forest works. Your other question about segmenting, the first thing that I did is understand how the data is varying. I understood that the income groups are kind of like the most important segmentation. So then what I did is an algorithm for each income group and an algorithm for the world. You can see in the lower left side here that these are the number of trees in the forest for each one of those. So I essentially have 5 different models that are different random forest regressions, and they are calculating, they are being trained only on the subset of data for countries in the lower income, middle income, and so on. And the data is 18 rows of data for all the influencers, all the results per country. So you have 18 rows multiplied by the number of countries in each income group. That's the total number of countries in there, of rows in there. So I hope that answers your question.
But the time frame, Gerardo, I mean, you're talking about
Oh,
that
yeah.
about a year, about 10 years, last 10 years.
Yeah, the time frame for this data is from 2000 to 2017. So essentially what this model is predicting is the new energy transition. So it's all about the renewables. It's all about what's going on today. It doesn't consider decades ago because the literature says that you should not consider any of the previous energy transitions compared to the energy transition of the 21st century, because this is the first time in the world that we actually make a transition because of being concerned about global emissions of CO2 and being concerned about air quality, pollution, and health. All the other energy transitions in the past were based on the market, and they were more like natural, quote unquote. So that's why we're not considering them.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, thanks, Gerardo. There's no more questions on YouTube. Right, Astu?
Let me check. Do you think no?
Okay.
No, there is no more questions from YouTube.
Okay.
Okay. Well, since it's Saturday, it's quite sunny here in Paris also, Gerardo. I guess in Abu Dhabi as well.
Yeah, it's time to go.
Would be time to go. Thanks for your presentation, and also thanks Marco, Cristina, Luis for your time and for your comments. I guess Gerardo has taken out from all of all of them, and he's gonna somehow include them in his thesis. When are you presenting, Gerardo?
September 17th, so it's coming up.
Okay. Okay. So, and please, the idea also of this is to please, I mean, as you could see, I mean, there's people with some expertise that has worked in certain areas. So please do not hesitate to communicate. We're going to send a little email about this debriefing, and also, well, please keep in touch between, I mean, with PM3, ME3, well, with people coming from the same master. And thanks, Gerardo. Well, Marco is just asking if where are you presenting, in France or in Spain?
I'm going to Madrid, so we'll be there in UPM.
Okay, okay.
Yeah, and thank you very much, Cesar, for the invitation, and thank you all of you because I really, this topic gets me going, so I can talk about this forever. But I do appreciate a lot your feedback, and it made me realize a lot of things that I haven't thought about, and it confirmed a few other things that I also thought about before. So for sure, this is going to be very, very helpful for me, and I hope it was helpful for you. Anything you want to know, if you want to have the algorithm as well, Christina, I can share that with you. If you guys need some data, whatever you need, I'm here for you. And for sure, I'll send you some emails as well with some follow-up questions. Thank you very much.
Well, thanks everybody, and have a nice weekend.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thanks, Cesar.
Thanks, everyone.